The whistling sound pierced the tropical air above the Solomon Islands. February 14, 1943. The altitude read 18,000 feet. Something new had arrived in the Pacific theater. Something that would transform the entire balance of aerial warfare. Japanese naval aviators spotted the distinctive silhouette immediately. Those inverted gull wings were unmistakable. The massive four-bladed propeller caught the sunlight. This wasn't another clumsy American fighter they could easily outmaneuver. The dark blue aircraft began climbing. Past 20,000 feet, it continued ascending, still climbing at 22,000 feet with power to spare. The Mitsubishi Zero pilots watched in disbelief. Their pride and joy, the aircraft that had dominated every sky from Pearl Harbor to Burma, struggled desperately at its operational ceiling. This was their first encounter with the Vought F4U Corsair. Soon the Japanese would know it by another name: Whistling Death. The sound came from the wing root oil coolers during high-speed dives, a shriek that would haunt Japanese pilots in their sleep. Within 18 months, this single aircraft type would shatter everything. The psychological foundation of Japanese naval aviation would crumble. Elite pilot corps who had terrorized Allied forces across the Pacific would become the hunted instead of the hunters. That Valentine's Day marked more than just another aerial engagement. It signaled the beginning of systematic technological dominance. American industrial might had produced a weapon that would transform Japan's most experienced warriors into men desperately avoiding combat whenever they spotted those bent wings approaching. The confidence of Japanese naval aviators in early 1943 bordered on absolute. These men represented the survivors of the world's most selective aviation training program. The Yokaran Naval Aviator Preparatory Course accepted fewer than 2% of all applicants. 3 years of brutal training followed acceptance. More candidates died in training than Americans lost in some major battles. By 1943, the average Japanese carrier pilot possessed over 800 hours of flight experience. Veterans from the China campaign boasted over 2,000 hours in combat aircraft. They had revolutionized naval warfare at Pearl Harbor. They had stunned British forces at Ceylon. Their dominance stretched from Burma to the Gilbert Islands without question. Throughout 1942, the Mitsubishi A6M0 achieved a 12-to-1 kill ratio against all Allied fighters. Japanese pilots had developed energy tactics that maximized every strength their aircraft possessed. Unmatched maneuverability made them deadly in turning fights. Exceptional range allowed operations far from base. Excellent visibility gave them tactical advantages in visual combat. The Zero could turn inside any Allied fighter, then operational. It could fly further than any opponent could dream of matching. In experienced hands, the aircraft seemed absolutely unbeatable by any existing Allied fighter. Japanese Navy fighter doctrine had been refined through 6 years of continuous combat in China. Individual skill received primary emphasis. Aggressive tactics were drilled into every pilot. They learned that spiritual superiority would overcome any material disadvantages they might face. The warrior's Bushido spirit would triumph over crude mechanical advantages. This philosophy had proven correct against Chinese pilots flying obsolete aircraft. It worked against British Hurricanes in Burma. American P-40s and F-4F Wildcats had fallen to the same tactical approach. Each victory reinforced their fundamental belief. Skill and fighting spirit would always defeat technology and armor. The spiritual warrior would triumph over the mechanical soldier. This wasn't just doctrine, but proven reality based on consistent combat success. The Corsairs' arrival in the Solomon Islands initially appeared to be just another American attempt, another effort to match the Zero through brute force engineering. The Japanese had seen this pattern before with disappointing results for the Americans. Marine Fighting Squadron 124 brought the first 12 F4U Corsairs to Guadalcanal on February 12, 1943. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft immediately noted the new fighter's distinctive appearance. Those inverted gull wings created an unmistakable silhouette. The massive propeller extended far beyond any previous American fighter design. The first combat encounter occurred on February 14th. Valentine's Day would become infamous in Japanese aviation circles. Corsairs escorted PB-4Y Sarandi-1 Liberators on a strike against Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. The engagement, later called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, proved initially disastrous for American forces. 9 Allied aircraft were lost, versus only 10 destroyed. However, the engagement revealed something crucial to observant Japanese pilots. These new fighters possessed performance characteristics that fundamentally altered air combat dynamics. The Corsairs refused to engage in traditional turning fights where Japanese pilots held every advantage. Instead, they climbed above the Zeros, something no American fighter had previously managed against experienced Japanese pilots. They executed high-speed diving attacks from superior altitude positions. The Americans used their massive speed advantage to escape before Japanese pilots could mount effective responses. Then they climbed back to altitude. They remained completely immune to pursuit during this maneuver. Technical specifications that Japanese intelligence gradually assembled on the F4U Corsair revealed overwhelming disparities in capability. The data painted a picture of technological advancement that seemed almost impossible. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP engine produced 2,000 horsepower on takeoff. Water injection boosted combat power to 2,250 horsepower when needed. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 engine managed only 1,930 horsepower at takeoff. This wasn't merely a power advantage, it represented an entirely different category of aircraft. A generational leap in fighter design and capability that Japanese engineers struggled to comprehend. Maximum speed data revealed the disparity in stark terms. The Corsair achieved 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet altitude. The Zero Model 52, Japan's latest variant available in 1943, managed 351 miles per hour under optimal conditions. Diving performance became absolutely terrifying for Japanese pilots to contemplate. Corsairs routinely exceeded 500 miles per hour while maintaining complete control authority. Zeros experienced dangerous control surface flutter at 360 miles per hour. Structural failure occurred above 410 miles per hour. Climbing performance data proved equally sobering for Japanese tactical planners. The Corsair reached 20,000 feet in just 7.7 minutes. Standard climb rate measured 2,190 feet per minute. Emergency power with water injection achieved 3,210 feet per minute. The Zero required 11 minutes to reach the same 20,000-foot altitude. Above 25,000 feet, where the Corsair remained powerful and responsive, the Zero became sluggish and barely controllable. The American fighter's service ceiling of 36,900 feet might as well have been outer space. Japanese pilots found their aircraft struggling badly above 33,000 feet. Effective combat operations became impossible at such altitudes. Armament differences proved psychologically devastating to Japanese pilots. The Corsair carried 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns. Each weapon fired 850 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity of 2,140 feet per second. The total weight of fire reached 69 pounds of metal per second. The Zero's 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons delivered only 13 pounds per second. The cannons carried merely 60 rounds per gun. enough ammunition for 7 seconds of continuous firing. Japanese pilots discovered that Corsairs were nearly indestructible compared to their unarmored Zeros. The F4U carried 155 pounds of armor plate surrounding the cockpit area. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fire from fuel leaks. Armored oil coolers protected vital engine systems. Cannon shells that would completely destroy a Zero merely damaged Corsairs. American fighters often returned to base with hundreds of holes punched through non-critical areas. This survivability completely transformed combat dynamics for both sides. American pilots could afford to be aggressive. Even reckless tactics became acceptable, knowing their aircraft forgave errors and battle damage. Japanese pilots had exactly one chance in each engagement. One mistake meant certain death. Their aircraft achieved legendary maneuverability by being the lightest possible fighter design. No armor protection whatsoever. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Structure cut to absolute minimum weight requirements. But the Corsair proved that American industrial capability had overcome the weight penalty completely. They built engines powerful enough to carry extensive armor and still outperform unprotected fighters. They created fighters that could survive mistakes, equipment failures, and lucky enemy hits. These were luxuries Japanese pilots would never experience. Every flight was a desperate gamble with death as the penalty for any error. Rabaul became the stage for the Corsair's systematic demolition of Japanese naval aviation. Japan's fortress in the Southwest Pacific served as their most powerful base outside the home islands. Here, the cream of Japanese fighter units concentrated to stop the American advance. By October 1943, when Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington's VMF 214 Black Sheep Squadron arrived with their F4U Corsairs, the psychological balance had already shifted dramatically. Japanese pilots no longer spoke confidently of victory. They discussed only survival. December 17, 1943, saw Boyington lead 31 Corsairs as cover for a major bombing raid on Rabaul. The Japanese launched 40 Zeros to intercept. Their best pilots flew their newest aircraft in what should have been an even engagement. The Corsairs climbed immediately to 25,000 feet. An altitude where Zeros struggled to maintain effective maneuverability. When Japanese formations climbed to engage, the Americans dove through their ranks at speeds approaching 450 miles per hour. They fired quick bursts during their diving passes. Then Zoom climbed back to altitude before Japanese pilots could respond effectively. The Zeros remained unable to follow, unable to escape, unable to force the close combat where they held advantages. 11 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. 2 Corsairs suffered damage but returned to base. The engagement demonstrated the complete tactical helplessness of even elite Japanese pilots against superior American technology. The psychological terror the Corsair inflicted transcended mere performance statistics. The aircraft's distinctive sound became a weapon in itself. Oil cooler intakes in the wing roots created an unforgettable whistling shriek during high-speed dives. Japanese pilots reported hearing this sound in their sleep. They developed involuntary reactions when any similar noise occurred. The sound of approaching death had burned itself into their memories. The Corsair's appearance amplified this psychological terror significantly. Inverted gull wings created a predatory silhouette, unlike any other aircraft in the sky. The massive propeller, measuring 13 feet 4 inches in diameter, was the largest ever fitted to any fighter aircraft. This created a brutal, purposeful appearance that seemed designed for destruction. The dark blue paint scheme made the aircraft nearly invisible against ocean backgrounds when diving from above. American pilots deliberately enhanced this psychological warfare campaign. They made terror dives without firing, just to create the whistling sound over Japanese airfields. Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron painted shark mouths on their Corsairs to enhance the predatory image. By mid-1943, Japan faced a terrible mathematical equation. Corsairs and other advanced American fighters were killing experienced pilots faster than Japan could possibly train replacements. Pre-war Japanese naval aviators received 500 to 700 hours of flight training before combat assignment. By 1943, fuel shortages and training aircraft losses had reduced this to 150 hours. By 1945, new pilots arrived with as little as 40 to 60 hours total flight time. They could barely handle their aircraft in normal flight conditions. Combat against Corsairs was simply execution. The psychological impact on veteran pilots became devastating. They found themselves paired with novices who had no chance whatsoever against Corsairs. Veterans were forced to watch them die while trying desperately to protect them. The traditional mentor system collapsed under the weight of constant losses. Veterans who faced Corsairs in 1943 predicted with horrible accuracy what would happen when American carrier aviation fully deployed the new generation of fighters. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated their predictions' accuracy. F-6F Hellcats, sharing the Corsair's engine and similar performance capabilities, joined the systematic destruction. Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Approximately 400 to 450 Japanese aircraft were destroyed versus 130 American planes lost. Many Japanese pilots never even saw their killers. They were shot down by fighters they couldn't climb high enough to engage or escape from in dives. The technological gap had become an unbridgeable chasm. Personal experiences of pilots who faced Corsairs reveal the depth of psychological transformation. From supreme confidence to absolute terror in less than 2 years of combat operations. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 became the first Corsair ace on May 13, 1943. He described typical engagements where Japanese pilots seemed completely helpless against the Corsair's performance advantages. Walsh achieved 21 victories in Corsairs over 6 months of combat operations. He later stated that the Corsair made aerial combat unfair due to its overwhelming advantages in every performance category. Fighting Zeros became purely mechanical. Climb above them using superior power and climb rate. Dive through their formation at speeds they couldn't match. Fire a burst during the high-speed pass. Zoom climb to safety before they could respond. Repeat the process until ammunition was exhausted. First Lieutenant Robert Hansen's extraordinary record demonstrated the Corsair's absolute dominance. 20 Japanese aircraft destroyed in just 17 days between January 14th and 30th, 1944. Flying with VMF 215, Hansen exploited the Corsair's advantages so effectively that Japanese formations scattered upon identifying Corsairs approaching. As 1943 progressed into 1944, improved variants of the Corsair widened the performance gap even further. The F4U 1A introduced a bubble canopy for dramatically better visibility. Water injection systems provided combat power increases when needed. Improved armor protection enhanced survivability. The F4U 1D could carry 4,000 pounds of bombs or rockets. More explosive power than many Japanese bombers could deliver, while still outperforming any Japanese fighter in air-to-air combat. Japanese attempts to counter the Corsair revealed their technological desperation. The Zero Model 52 added armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks, but it became so heavy that it lost the maneuverability advantage without gaining meaningful survivability. The new Kawanishi N1K George fighter showed some promise in testing, but it suffered from unreliable engines and complex hydraulic systems that failed constantly under combat conditions. Deployment of F4U-2 night fighter variants in 1944 added a terrifying new dimension. Equipped with APS-4 airborne radar, these 36 specially modified Corsairs hunted Japanese aircraft in complete darkness. Darkness had previously been Japan's only sanctuary from American fighters. The psychological impact of being hunted in darkness by invisible predators shattered the last vestiges of Japanese pilot confidence. The ultimate psychological defeat came with the adoption of kamikaze tactics in late 1944. This transformation from warriors seeking victory to pilots seeking only meaningful death represented complete acknowledgement of technological defeat. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, privately admitted the true reason for suicide attacks. Conventional combat against Corsairs and Hellcats had become completely impossible. By late 1944, the exchange ratio had reached 15-1 in favor of American fighters. Rather than die meaninglessly in hopeless air-to-air combat, Japanese pilots would attempt to die with purpose by attacking ships directly. American pilots flying Corsairs accumulated victories at rates that would have seemed impossible in 1942. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington scored 22 of his 26 total victories in Corsairs in just 84 days of combat operations. These incredible scores weren't achieved through superior skill alone. They resulted from overwhelming technical advantages that made victory almost inevitable against Japanese opposition. The Japanese recognized this harsh reality completely. Their best surviving pilots understood that American aces were created primarily by their superior aircraft rather than exceptional flying skill. The machine had become more important than the man, a complete reversal of traditional Japanese fighter doctrine that emphasized individual warrior spirit above all technological considerations. The Corsair represented American industrial might in its most concentrated and deadly form. Vought aircraft produced 12,571 Corsairs during the entire war. More aircraft than Japan's total fighter production from 1942 to 1945 combined. Each individual Corsair contained 1,300 pounds of aluminum, 1,000 pounds of high-grade steel, 18 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 individual instruments and control components. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine alone demonstrated American industrial supremacy. With 2,800 cubic inches of displacement, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, supercharging systems, and precision engineering tolerances Japan couldn't achieve even when examining captured examples. It represented technology beyond Japanese capability to copy or manufacture. While Japan scraped the bottom of its manpower reserves, sending teenagers with minimal training to face Corsairs, America mass-produced pilots with industrial efficiency. The U.S. Navy trained 60,000 pilots during the war years. Each pilot received 600 hours of comprehensive flight training, including 200 hours in advanced fighter aircraft. American pilots arrived in the Pacific having fired more ammunition during training than most Japanese pilots fired during their entire combat careers. They studied gun camera footage from successful engagements. They analyzed detailed combat reports from veteran pilots. They underwent continuous tactical evolution based on combat experience and lessons learned. Japanese pilot training, meanwhile, collapsed into complete futility. New pilots arrived with less than 100 hours total flight time. They had never fired their guns during training exercises. They had never practiced high-altitude combat maneuvers. They had never experienced high-speed diving attacks. The Corsair's transformation into a multi-role fighter bomber during 1944 added another terrifying dimension. Carrying bombs, rockets, and napalm, Corsairs could destroy airfields, shipping, and infrastructure with complete impunity. This multi-role capability meant Corsairs could appear anywhere, anytime, in any role. Strategic uncertainty was added to existing tactical terror. Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace, with 64 confirmed victories, provided the clearest assessment of facing Corsairs in his post-war writings. He described recognizing that the war was completely lost upon encountering the Corsair. Not because of one superior aircraft, but because America could build such aircraft by the thousands, while Japan struggled desperately to maintain existing obsolete designs. Sakai noted that survival against Corsairs required avoiding engagement entirely. When Japanese pilots spotted those distinctive bent wings, they would dive for the deck immediately, flee to cloud cover, anything to avoid direct combat. This wasn't cowardice, but cold recognition of reality. Fighting a Corsair while flying a Zero had become nothing more than elaborate suicide. By early 1945, the statistical evidence told a story of complete annihilation. Corsairs claimed 2,140 aerial victories against 189 combat losses, and kill ratio of 11.3 to 1 that understated the psychological devastation. Many Japanese aircraft fled without engaging when Corsairs were identified. Others were destroyed on the ground by marauding Corsair fighter bombers. Countless pilots refused to take off when Corsairs were reported in their operational area. The final insult came from production comparisons. In 1945 alone, America produced 7,129 fighters of all types. Japan managed 1,430 aircraft, most inferior to American designs from 1942. The Corsair production line alone consistently outproduced Japan's entire aviation industry. American industrial capacity had made the outcome inevitable regardless of individual pilot skill or fighting spirit. The Corsair's dominance shattered fundamental aspects of Japanese military culture permanently. The concept of Yamato Damashi, the unique Japanese spirit that would overcome material disadvantages, proved completely hollow against overwhelming technological superiority. Traditional emphasis on individual warrior skill became meaningless when skill couldn't overcome massive performance disparities. The most experienced Japanese ace, flying the most perfectly maintained Zero, had no realistic chance against an average American pilot in a Corsair. This reality destroyed the philosophical foundation of Japanese military training and doctrine. Everything they had believed about warfare proved wrong when faced with American industrial might. The Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945 provided the Corsair's final demonstration of absolute superiority. Marine and Navy Corsairs flew from escort carriers and captured airfields, establishing complete air supremacy over the last major Japanese base outside the home islands. Statistics from Okinawa revealed the true scale of technological dominance. Corsairs flew over 15,000 combat sorties, claimed over 500 aerial victories, and delivered thousands of tons of ordnance against ground targets. Japanese pilots, many with less than 30 hours of total flight training, faced systematic destruction. The few survivors described engagements lasting mere seconds. They never even managed to point their guns at the Corsairs that destroyed them. As Japan prepared for the anticipated invasion of the home islands, the reality of facing thousands of Corsairs created complete strategic paralysis. Japanese planners calculated that Americans could deploy over 5,000 Corsairs from carriers and captured airfields. Against this overwhelming force, Japan could muster perhaps 2,000 flyable aircraft of all types. Most were obsolete designs, flown by pilots with minimal training and no realistic chance of success. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, later acknowledged that conventional air combat had become completely impossible. The only remaining strategy involved hiding aircraft for one-way suicide attacks. The Corsair had made traditional fighter combat obsolete for Japanese aviation. When atomic bombs ended the war in August 1945, they spared Japanese aviation from final systematic annihilation. Plans existed for Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, where over 2,000 Corsairs would have operated from 48 aircraft carriers and dozens of captured airfields. Japanese pilots who survived the war expressed genuine relief at avoiding this final confrontation. It would have been extermination rather than combat. The technological gap had become so vast that meaningful resistance was impossible. In the immediate post-war period, American occupation forces brought Japanese military leaders to observe American aircraft factories. The Vought plant in Connecticut, still producing Corsairs, revealed the true scale of American industrial capacity. Single American factories produced more aircraft engines monthly than all of Japan combined. Individual American states possessed more aluminum production capacity than the entire Japanese empire. Former Japanese naval officers observing these massive production lines finally understood the complete impossibility of their wartime position. They had challenged an industrial superpower with essentially pre-industrial capacity. They had sent pilots trained for individual combat against mass-produced machines of overwhelming superiority. The outcome had been inevitable from the moment American industry focused on the war effort. Final statistics of Corsair operations in the Pacific War tell the story of complete technological domination. Combat performance data reveals the scale of American superiority. Total Corsairs produced reached 12,571 aircraft. Total aerial victories numbered 2,140 confirmed kills. Air-to-air combat losses totaled 189 Corsairs. The overall kill ratio achieved 11.3 to 1 in favor of American pilots. Combat missions flown exceeded 64,000 sorties. Bombs and rockets delivered totaled 15,621 tons of ordnance. These numbers represent systematic destruction of Japanese aviation capabilities. Performance supremacy measurements show the technological gap clearly. Speed advantage over the Zero reached 66 miles per hour. Climb rate advantage exceeded 1,000 feet per minute. Diving speed advantage surpassed 140 miles per hour. Altitude ceiling advantage measured 3,900 feet higher than Japanese fighters. Firepower advantage delivered 530% more weight of fire per second. These weren't marginal improvements, but generational leaps in capability. Production comparisons reveal American industrial might. Peak monthly Corsair production reached 418 aircraft. Japanese fighters of all types peaked at 250 monthly. American pilot training provided 600 hours instruction. Japanese training in 1945 averaged 40 to 60 hours total. Japanese aviation engineers studied captured Corsairs intensively after the war. They used them as templates for understanding how far behind Japanese technology had fallen during the conflict. Every system examined revealed advancement Japan had never imagined possible. Hydraulics, electronics, metallurgy, production techniques all showed capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. The Corsair's influence appeared in every post-war Japanese aircraft design. Lessons learned from studying the aircraft that had terrorized their predecessors shaped Japan's aerospace development for decades. American Corsair pilots expressed complex emotions about their overwhelming technological superiority. Many felt combat had become execution rather than honorable warfare, particularly in 1945 when facing teenage Japanese pilots in obsolete aircraft. The Corsair had transformed air combat into an industrial process. American pilots weren't knights jousting in the sky according to chivalric codes. They were skilled technicians operating vastly superior machinery against hopeless opposition. The Japanese remained committed to their warrior traditions until the very end. but they faced the reality of bringing swords to a machine gun fight. Honor and courage meant nothing against overwhelming mechanical superiority. The Corsairs' dominance contributed to fundamental changes in Japanese society during the post-war period. Complete failure of spiritual strength against American technology helped discredit militaristic ideology permanently. It prompted enthusiastic embrace of technological modernization as the path to future prosperity. The F4U Corsair had proven daily and personally to thousands of Japanese that their entire worldview was fundamentally wrong. Fighting spirit could not overcome superior technology. Individual will could not defeat mass production and industrial capacity. Personal courage meant absolutely nothing when facing overwhelming mechanical superiority backed by limitless resources. The story of Japanese pilots confronting the F4U Corsair ultimately demonstrates technological determinism written in blood and fire across Pacific skies. It proves that in industrial warfare, production lines defeat warrior codes every time. Engineering skill and manufacturing capacity triumph over individual courage and fighting spirit. The Corsair didn't merely shoot down Japanese aircraft, it systematically demolished an entire military philosophy and cultural worldview. Every Japanese pilot who faced the Corsair and survived carried the same devastating message back to their commanders. We cannot match this superior technology. We cannot stop this industrial juggernaut. We cannot win this war. The accumulation of these individual defeats created collective understanding that transcended military failure to become civilizational revelation. Just as German POWs had arrived in America expecting weakness and discovered overwhelming industrial might, Japanese pilots entered the war confident in their spiritual superiority and training. They discovered instead that they faced not just superior aircraft, but the concentrated expression of a superior civilization's complete industrial power and technological advancement. The F4U Corsair stands as an enduring monument to the principle that in modern warfare, technological superiority multiplied by industrial capacity equals inevitable victory. For Japanese naval aviation, the Corsair served as judge, jury, and executioner. It judged their technology completely inadequate. It found their tactics obsolete and useless. It declared their entire military philosophy fundamentally wrong. The psychological journey from absolute supremacy to paralyzing terror took less than 2 years. From supreme confidence to desperate survival instincts, from tactical innovation to kamikaze suicide attacks. Each stage was measured in encounters with the bent-wing fighter that stripped away illusions until only naked truth remained. Japan had challenged an industrial superpower with warrior spirit and ancient traditions. They lost absolutely and completely in every measurable category. Today, restored Corsairs fly at air shows worldwide, their distinctive whistle still evoking powerful memories among those old enough to remember. But for those who faced them in actual combat, the Corsair represented something far more significant than just another warbird. It was a teacher of harsh truths, a destroyer of comfortable illusions, and living proof that in modern warfare, the nation with superior factories defeats the nation with braver warriors. Japanese pilots developed genuine terror of the F4U Corsair. Not because they were cowards lacking in fighting spirit, but because they were rational men who understood completely they faced overwhelming civilizational advantage, rather than just better aircraft. Their terror represented wisdom. The terrible wisdom that comes from recognizing everything you believed about warfare and life was fundamentally wrong. The recognition that your death would serve only to prove your enemy's technological and industrial superiority. In the end, The Corsair achieved what no amount of propaganda or political pressure could accomplish. It made elite Japanese pilots afraid to fly their own aircraft. It made veteran warriors reluctant to engage in the combat they had trained their entire lives to master. And in that fear lay the seed of Japan's complete transformation. From militaristic empire devoted to territorial conquest to peaceful economic power focused on technological development. A transformation purchased with the blood of pilots who learned too late that in modern industrial warfare, individual courage means absolutely nothing when your enemy controls both the sky and the factories that fill it with superior machines. The psychological devastation was complete. The technological lesson was permanent. The Corsair had taught Japan that in the modern world, industrial might trumps warrior spirit every single time.